having a point of self-reflection, and I can just tell you that I actually did the Audible, the book of your Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn. And it was really good for me because it was just playing in my ear and I could hear your voice and Mr. Yoshino's voice. But I can tell you that that allowed me to do a personal reflection and assessment of where I was. And it really opened up for me that I have a lot to learn. And I think that sometimes people may think that a trip to Japan is like, oh, I don't need to go there. I already know what I need to do. That's just a trip to Japan. I think that, and I'm not saying that maybe it's other books that are like yours or other readings or moments, but I think there needs to be a point of really kind of self-reflection. And I felt like the book really forced me to really reflect.
Welcome to Chain of Learning, where the links of leadership and learning unite. This is your connection for actionable strategies and practices to empower you to build a people-centered learning culture, get results, and expand your impact so that you and your team can leave a lasting legacy. I'm your host and fellow learning enthusiast, Katie Anderson. Do you ever feel like you and other leaders in your organization are working on the same problems year after year, or that you're burdened with the impossible task of solving all the problems that get in the way of achieving the results you need? You're not alone. This is the crux of the leadership challenge it takes to create a thriving, high-performing organization, one where people at all levels are engaged and aligned on what is most important and are capable and confident of contributing their best thinking on how to get there. But what does it take as a leader, especially as a senior leader, to really create this culture of continuous improvement? As I've learned from my leadership development work with executive teams and leading change with organizations around the world for the past 2 decades, it's about making a shift as leaders from focusing primarily on the results, instead how leaders create the conditions in their organization for their people to get those results while developing their own capabilities to lead at the same time. This requires a shift in mindset and a shift in behavior. And it requires leaders to be serious about both. By serious, I don't mean stern, but rather, as Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines serious, requiring much thought or work, or relating to a matter of importance, being in earnest. The topic of being a serious leader, one who is earnest and committed to creating a culture of continuous improvement, is one we've been exploring on this podcast. Toyota leader Isao Yoshino, subject of my book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, shared in episode 21 why seriousness is one of the most important qualities of a leader. And in episode 20, Brad Toussaint talked about how he coaches executives to develop the mindset and practices of being a serious leader. To explore what it takes as an executive to be a serious leader, striving to apply the principles of continuous improvement and creating a high-performing organization in today's complex work environments, I invited 2 senior executives in my chain of learning to the podcast to talk about the shifts that they're making in their leadership style and what impact these shifts are having not only in their leadership, but on their teams and the results in their organization. In fact, they are 2 of the executives that Brad highlighted in episode 20 that he's working with. Dr. Kecia Kelly is Senior Vice President and Chief Nursing Officer for Legacy Health, a health system in the state of Oregon, United States. Kecia began her nursing career as an officer in the United States Army Nurse Corps, where she served in progressive leadership roles from charge nurse to manager. She holds both a Doctor of Nursing Practice in Executive Leadership and a Master's of Business Administration in Healthcare Management, and she's served in multiple leadership roles in healthcare organizations around the country. Dr. Amy Chaumeton is a board-certified internist and serves as the Associate Chief Medical Officer at Legacy Health. Amy's held many leadership roles in her over 25 years of service at Legacy, including Chief Medical Officer for Legacy's Level 1 Trauma and Burn Center and an 11-year tenure as Chief Medical Informatics Officer. Kecia and Amy, along with Legacy Health Chief Operating Officer Jonathan Avery, joined me for my May 2024 Japan Study Trip Leadership Program as an executive learning cohort together, along with their 2 leadership coaches, including Brad Toussaint. I invited Kecia and Amy here to the podcast to talk about their perspective and lessons as executive leaders, creating a cultural shift in their organization. What has made a difference in how they're leading, and how have they become more committed about demonstrating their seriousness as senior leaders. If you're an executive or senior leader, or a change leader supporting operational leaders, seeking to be serious about how to create a culture of excellence, this is an episode you won't want to miss. We started off our conversation with a question exploring what was going on at Legacy Health that caused Kecia and Amy and others in the executive leadership team to say, we need to do something differently. Let's dive into the discussion about serious leadership, starting with Kecia's response.
I'm happy to share that one. And, I think that, Legacy Health is, we've been a system for quite some time. It's been around, I think it's grown over the years. And I joined Legacy Health 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago. And what I saw was a very palpable gap between our frontline staff and executive leadership. It was palpable. And there was a feeling of just being out of touch and not understanding what was happening at the front line. And when we were making efforts to be at the front line, then there was criticism that we were just being performative and checking the box, like we're just doing it. And I don't think we really had collectively, and when I think of executive leadership, I'm a senior vice president. So I'm thinking of senior leadership. What we were really thinking as we were really on this journey, prior to even going to Japan, was that we were just trying to find ways to have meaningful connections with our frontline team, because we knew that if we could have meaningful connections with them where they could feel seen, heard, and valued, then we know that that was going to translate into performance. But in all honesty, Katie, I don't think that we collectively fully understood what that meant and how to do that. and so with Brad Toussaint from Value Capture being our coach, and John Caladora, he had been really kind of selling the trip to Japan to us like a year before we even went, and really felt that this was going to be a good opportunity for us. And so I think that was really kind of where we were, and we've truly have evolved since that time. We still have more work to do, but that would be what I think was really drove us to really consider this experience.
That's great. Amy, how about for you? You're on the medical side, and what were some of the challenges that you've been facing as a medical senior leader?
Well, I think Legacy has been trying to embark on this journey for really almost a couple decades now, and we've had spits and starts along the way, and it was Catherine Correa who really set that track and trajectory going forward in a, as you talk about serious leader, and she seriously had this as an objective for Legacy going forward. And I think on the medical side, we struggle to understand how we can do this work and the clinical work as well. And as we go forward and see that if you can embark on this journey as it being part of the work and part of that continuous improvement for the patient, and you center this around the patient, it becomes a ever so slightly easier journey.
For sure. I remember my time, for listeners tuning in, Brad Toussaint and I worked together for many years. He was on Chain of Learning episode 20. And it was some of my ahas in leading continuous improvement in healthcare that, all these, you had the nursing staff, and you had the operations staff, and you had the medical team, and everyone had slightly different silos. But if you could, Amy, as you said, anchor around the patient, really that kind of aligned everything as well. And for those of you who don't work in a healthcare environment, it's really how do you anchor around, the customer, whatever that end customer is, what do they value, what do they need, and how can you align all of the, all the teams and the people around that. Kecia and Amy, I'm curious. So, you had some senior leadership who were truly serious and they brought this in. And what was it like for you when, said, we're going to lead in a different way? We're going to do things differently. What was your experience of that? Like, you'd been successful up to this point in leading a certain way. What was that like for you?
I think for me, and Katie, I think just for background, I'm a veteran, so I served in the military, and I'm very proud of that service as an officer. And I had always believed in, do as I do and not as I say, and I was always like this champion of leading by example and feeling like if I could set the example, then people will say, wow, geez, then that's the way to do it. And just realizing that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. And for me, what I learned, I think in this experience was this piece around, and I'll refer to your book when you talk about this commitment to self-development and this commitment to developing your people and providing support and guidance, right? And for me, the realm of self-development was just me getting my educations, my certification, and and it was really, in retrospective, maybe it was a little more. It's pretty self-centered when you think about the body of work around being a serious leader, because self-development and what I've learned, it's really about developing yourself to understand the work that the people that you are serving and what they're doing, and developing yourself in understanding what that work is and what the barriers are and what they're celebrating, and really being intentional about going to the Gemba, wanting to understand, like, you want to know what's going well. That's great. But you also want to know what the problems are. And I think too often I think about, we used to call it, the dog and pony show, when the commanding officer would come by and everybody just wanted everything to look good, spit, shine, shiny floors, beds made. But we knew that if you opened up those chests, there was crap in there, right? But nobody wanted them to see that. And I think that the change here is that, okay, we want to see all the bad things. We want to see the junk. We want to see the muck, because that's where we can really help and support them. Because clearly what's going well are things that they've been able to accomplish on their own. But as leaders, our job is to help when we're solving problems. And I have a quote that I have by Colin Powell. It's on my LinkedIn page. And it's about leadership is about solving problems. It is about solving problems. And the moment that your team stop approaching you for problems, they've either lost confidence and they don't trust you anymore, or they don't believe that you're going to get it done. I mean, they just pretty much have given up on you. And so that's been a shift in a paradigm for me and how I'm showing up as a leader. And, and I have examples that I've been able to do just recently around that. People wanting to tell me about the great things and me being able to say, okay, that's great, but I want to know how I can help you. I want to understand what your problems are. And it's definitely a palpable shift that you can feel in the room when you change that dynamic with your teams.
It's so true. There's a section in my book talking about how Mr. Yoshino asked the senior president of Toyota, Mr. Fujio Cho, to come visit his failing business. And Mr. Cho made the point of going out, made the time in his busy schedule, which was incredible. He's showing that he really cared. But then Mr. Yoshino started telling him all the good things that were going on. He said, no, I didn't come here to see all the good things. I came here to hear the bad things so that I can help you. And it sounds like that was a real shift for you as well. And as a leadership team, you're making, I love that quote from Colin Powell, leadership's about solving problems, but it's not about you solving all the problems. It's about creating those conditions for your teams to solve.
Right. And that's a role for us as leaders. We're not there to fix all the problems, but we are there to create the conditions to where people can solve those problems on their own. Because either way, if we fail to do it, it is a failure in leadership on our part. And I take that very seriously.
Amy, you've shared that you had some ahas as well about this concept of go to Gemba, or go to the place the work is happening. It really was an aha for you on the most recent trip that you joined me on my Japan study trip program. What was the shift for you, and how has that impacted how you're going out to see?
Going to the Gemba for me prior to the trip was very much about checking on the work, validating the assumptions, trying to recognize problems, and making sure that the people doing the work understood the why behind it. And what you couldn't tell me in a lecture, or you couldn't tell me in a book, is how the leaders that we saw in Japan actually go to the Gemba. How you can tell from their every interaction, their eye contact with their employees, their interactions with their employees, the respect that's going back and forth. I don't think you can parlay that or express that in a way that people can really understand until they see it. And it was really beautiful. I mean, we were in one of the manufacturing companies, and the CEO pulled the andon, and you could see the employee roll their eyes, but yet smile, knowing that this was part of, the tour to show what occurs when the andon gets pulled, that people come to help, people thank the worker for having noticed a problem. And we saw that in a couple different ways. And so at one of the companies, really fun music played when the andon got pulled. And I mean, I think this will resonate with Kecia, but when you walk through the halls of the hospital, there's this beep, 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 and it's annoying. And it's annoying to get people's attention. And I don't think it necessarily celebrates finding a problem or an issue that we can then celebrate because we can solve to root and make a difference in those people's day. And I think that was just eye-opening for me as we went through the different locations that we went to in Japan.
And they have like happy music when a problem, so andon is, the signal that someone needs help or there's an issue. And, there's different sort of joyful music that plays or melodious music rather than, yes, when you're in hospital, it's the or it's almost like a punitive sound, right?
Yeah. And we also saw that at the school that we went to in Japan, where change of, going into lunch or coming out of lunch and going into recess and then coming back to actually clean the school by the students was all fun music. It wasn't a beeping or a horn to indicate. It was in some ways a celebration that we're moving on to something new and the next thing.
Yeah, not like the school bell, yes, kind of puts you in the wrong mindset. Thinking back to even before you came to the Japan trip with me, because I want to explore sort of some of your trajectory as more maybe, traditional healthcare leaders, some of the things that you were trying and some of the, maybe successes, but also some challenges you were having. And then we can talk about sort of more of those ahas that you had, how you're continuing to evolve and make impact in your organization. So Kecia, what were some of those shifts that you were starting to make, how to support problem solving with your teams, and what were some of the I guess the shifts that you were starting to make in the organization?
Well, when I think about kind of just my ascension to being a senior healthcare executive, I had been rooted in some form of lean in some form of way. I'd been trained as an equivalent to a green belt, I'd learned about Six Sigma, I had learned about these different kind of lean principles, PDCA, but everything was really in a space of rapid cycle improvement, right? It's all about, plan, do, check, act, put the plan together, put some things you're going to do, how are we going to check? And we had the term act, but not necessarily adjust, which is a different, the check and adjust, which is something I learned at Legacy. And what I really have learned, just really being here at Legacy and really being kind of steeped in the operating system that we have at Legacy, it's really about how do we create sustained improvement, right? Because, a lot of times the rapid cycle improvement is where we need a quick turnaround on something, but, never really fully understand, we could never really sustain, right? We achieve improvement, we all celebrate, and then we move to something else. And then whatever we fixed and made better, it falters because we never really had systems in place to actually sustain what that improvement was. And really just kind of my evolution here with Legacy and then also eventually with the trip is really this creating, how do we create that sustained improvement? And the piece for me that I continue to go back in is that it is rooted in the people who are at the front line. It is literally the key to anything being successful and being sustained. It is absolutely tied to the people who are doing the work. And how do we create the conditions in the process? And that's the whole thing that we saw in Japan around creating standard work, celebrating those small wins. I mean, it was just a constant continuum of just celebration and improvement and creating venues for people to submit ideas and those ideas not going into a vacuum. I mean, so I think that's the evolution that we're trying to really do here at Legacy. And we've seen some pockets of excellence of where people are actually doing that, where they are engaging the front line, where they feel like this, because I think that's just the piece. I mean, I think that there's a feeling a lot of times that the senior executives are going to solve all the problems for the organization. And it is an incredibly heavy burden to carry. It is heavy. It's heavy. And the reason why it's heavy and it's burdensome because it's impossible. It is. But what we can do is create the conditions for and create a venue for our frontline to be successful. And how we do that is by creating a space where they have a voice, they have a say, we're listening to their ideas, but we haven't really gotten that down to a way that I think is sustainable because sometimes the ideas are pretty grandiose and almost difficult to achieve. So they become what we call the slow no or the no never, and we never, it's the small things. And I think about some work we saw at one of our SPD departments where they basically have a problem of the week that they're and the staff identify what it is and how they want to track it. So that's just kind of an example of it. So
it's about how, how you've been really the tipping point for change and what you've been trying to do as well. And Amy, there's been so much, burnout, especially for physicians and feeling overburdened that probably this even like asking them to come up and solve problems is like, whoa, don't even come to me. I just need to get the job done. How have you been thinking about, this could be for both of you, but how do you think about supporting your people in this really pressured environment to get results and to do high quality, help cure people and help them in day to day, and then you're adding problem solving on top of it? Amy, how have you been thinking about that, from the medical side?
So I think as we've approached this, what's fascinating is as we do have this culture currently still in place of the leaders are the ones who are supposed to fix the problems. And as we've approached our patient flow work that we've been working on for the last really 2 years now, is trying to affect change where we can actually make a difference for the providers and the nurses so that they can see the change, but trying to engage them in helping us guide that work. And part of that is using these processes, but then showing them the success and trying to celebrate that success a little bit, telling them the why. I mean, the lights that go on when you explain to somebody why you're asking them to do one additional step, which is, if you think about it, if you're seeing 12 to 15 patients a day, it's 15 additional steps in their day, which is already overburdened. But there's been a couple of times where I've been talking to providers about the expected day of discharge that we're asking them to populate so the whole team can see and understand what their thinking is around when the patient might be discharged from the hospital. And they're like, oh, it's not just a administrative piece that you want. It actually has a reason behind it. It actually can help others. It will help them because of the communication cascade that occurs from it. And just trying to take little wins slowly to our frontline workers so that they will start to engage in the process. When you start talking to them and explaining the why, you actually get a lot back. And if you can ingest that and then take those problems to root and start to solve them, that's when we'll start to see, I think, some success and some increased engagement in our problem solving closer to the front line.
Build the successes, like try a little bit and then see what happens. And how does that both serve the patient or the customer, but also serve the people doing the work, and how does it all connect together? One of the topics that I know, we've explored on the Japan study trip, and that Brad Toussaint has also been exploring with you over the last year since he first heard Mr. Yoshino talk about it on a previous trip, is the concept of the serious leader and how leaders really, truly have to be serious about leading this type of change. And I'm curious to explore with you, what have you discovered about what it means as a senior leader to truly be serious? And what steps are you taking to sort of embody that seriousness in your organization?
I continue to, and Katie, I'm not trying to market your book, okay? But I will tell you that there are books that I have read over my career that just leave imprints in my head. And there is a book that's called Just Break All the Rules, and it's a book about managing people according to their strengths. And so let me get to your book now. And so it really is learning to lead, leading to learn, and this whole concept around serious leadership, and and those three fundamental statements around providing, you give direction and support and continuously self-develop and developing the people that you serve. And I think about, and so for me, the seriousness around that is understanding that as a senior vice president that is leading, there's only 9 of us, but there's 14,000 caregivers in this organization. And being a serious leader makes me, and first of all, I can't do all the things for 14,000 caregivers. So what I've been trying to do as a senior leader, what is really how do we cascade that and building that capability with my own direct reports, my direct reports. Because if I can build that capability with them around the providing direction and helping them to understand what it means to develop your people and develop yourself, it's more than just, and developing the people, it is around that problem solving and creating that capability for them to really get in that space. The developing yourself is really that learning to understand their work and understand their problems. And so I'm trying to build that capability with my direct reports. And part of my direction around that is creating the expectation that I want you to carry this forward with the leaders that are under you so that they in turn carry that forward. And you talk about, that whole chain of learning. That is a chain of learning. And that's how it happens, right? I can't just go to Nancy on the front line who's delivering patient care and I can help her to be a fantastic nurse, but she's one of 5,000 nurses that I represent in this organization. But what I can do is create a chain of learning that allows that to happen where we can impact 5,000 nurses. And so that's for me the impact. And I can tell you, Katie, that it has taken a lot of pressure off of me as a senior leader because you can feel like you just want to boil the ocean and save the world, and you can't do that. But you can do that by creating that intentionality with the people that you serve. So that's kind of been my reflection around becoming a serious leader, and it is a journey. And I'm just kind of, we just got back in May, so we're still it's a journey, and it'll be a continuous journey that I'm committed to.
So powerful. And that concept of intention, it's like, what's the impact you want to have? And then what behaviors align with that? And it maybe is counterintuitive that actually unburdening yourself with the responsibility of solving all the problems and instead creating the conditions actually solves more problems and gives you more space for that. But it can feel counterintuitive when you're used to being the directive leader who's sort of stuck in this firefighting mode and getting things done. Amy, how about yourself?
So I see there's two things I see about being a serious leader that I really learned in Japan, to be frankly honest. One is around 1,000% conviction. And when you have that alignment in the senior leadership team that we saw in most of the companies that we engaged with and watched, it becomes so clear with everything they do that they are aligned in that 1,000% conviction for respect of people. And it goes beyond that, right? One of the companies he talked about, it's about being, not doing, and how that was bred into him over generations. And so they've been 1,000% convicted about respecting their employees, taking care of their families, and being there for the community for so long. It's clear in everything that they do, how they follow that line of thinking. So that I think that piece, and that for me is sort of that intent piece. We had some interesting reflections as a group, and I think that was the other really powerful piece for me as we do personal reflection on different meetings and thoughts and things that we're doing. But hearing reflections from our senior leaders, Kecia and Jonathan, on the trip, we embarked a little bit on talking about our mission, and that's where we should be 1,000% convicted around. How we interpret it a little bit differently because we come from different walks of life, we come from different experiences, and that group reflection and how powerful it is to then pull us in together to talk about our mission, which sets us up for incredible success, which is our people, our patients, our community, our world, above all else, do the right thing, which is very much in line with what we saw with the leaders in Japan. We've lived it a different way, and so we can talk about it in such a different way now. But I think the main piece being that group collective reflection, which is aligning us and creating clarity of that goal so that we can set those expectations and follow through with our organization is the gold mine right there. So creating that intent and then that respect for people being the most important pieces.
So powerful. It's really pulling together those three parts of, what I call leading to learn. And Kecia, you referenced this that came out of my book from a comment Mr. Yoshino made, that a leader's role is really set the direction, that clarity of mission, purpose, where do we need to go, provide that support, and then develop yourself, which is more than just reading a book, which can be helpful as you shared, but really applying that and developing yourself through intentional practice and more. Maybe it's a good time to transition to talk about the power of coming on this Japan study trip executive program as a leadership team. So you had three of yourselves as executives. So the Chief Operating Officer, Jonathan Avery, the two of yourselves, and then your two external consultants who are your coaches and guides on this, this learning journey, Brad and John. I have a lot of people who come as individual leaders or individual consultants, but the power of coming together was really strong. You've already talked, Amy, about being able to have those shared reflections. I'm curious, what was it that led you to make that investment as a leadership team to come together? And then what was the impact on you and the organization of being able to have that experience?
It was very esoteric and abstract at first. And I'll be very honest with you. I was like, oh, Japan, it'll be cool. And, and I literally initially had this mindset, we're going to go learn about lean, and this is a lean experience. And so that was really the space I was in initially, but thankfully, lots of reading. We had lots of reading assignments, and Brad may have told you, I think that there was I think coming together as an executive team with our coaches is that we had structured learning opportunities prior to the trip. I think we had at least 4 or 5 sessions where we just kind of prepared ourselves so we could experience the trip in a way that it didn't feel like we were just boom, learning everything for the first time. And it could be overwhelming, like, why are we here? And what are we doing? So I can tell you personally, I went into that engagement kind of having a foundational knowledge about what we were going to learn. And so it made things that much more exciting for us. I want to revert back what Amy said earlier. Catherine Correa, she's our retired CEO now, but our CEO at the time, what we learned in Japan is what she had been preaching for her entire time she'd been here. And I think that, hindsight's always 2020. This experience may have been good for the senior executive leadership team, maybe shortly after she joined. It was almost conflicting mindsets around that. So she was all in for making this investment in us because it was a significant investment for Legacy to make in us. But she truly fundamentally believed that the return on the investment for Legacy Health was going to be infinite. So I think that was the power of it. And even coming back from Japan, Brad and John, our coaches, have really kept this up front for us. And I'm going to just manage up Amy, Dr. Chaumeton as well too, because in one of our largest bodies of work, she has kept this forefront in every pieces of our work. I mean, the 1,000% what she's talking about. So we have continued to find ways to infuse our learning experience in our current work. And I'll just say one last thing is that we have 1,000% alignment around some work we're doing around financial health of the organization. And we've seen the beauty of when you have 1,000% conviction and alignment, because the likelihood of it being, we know it's going to be less, but what we need to do and what we're going to do is apply that to all the work that we're doing. We've seen we can actually visually see when you're 1,000% convicted, what happens. But we know that we have other priorities in the organization where we don't have 1,000% conviction as a senior leadership team. And we need to get there, because if we're not there, it won't happen and it won't infuse throughout the organization.
It's so true. And I think we've also talked about the dilution. If the senior team is 1,000% convicted, then the next level of leadership may be at 500% conviction and half each way on the way down. And that by the time you get to the frontline workers, it's not feeling as tangible or as real. And so how important it is that you start with that absolute 1,000% conviction with the senior team supporting those initiatives that you're working on.
How did that time together away from your day-to-day work and be having this shared learning experience actually help accelerate you towards that alignment and 1,000% conviction, not just with the three of you who are on the trip, but influencing the rest of the leadership team?
It comes back in almost every piece of our work. I think Kecia and I see it in so many places. I mean, as I watch Kecia in her interactions and her work that she's doing, I see it everywhere now, and it's incredibly powerful to watch. We're working on that 1,000% conviction and alignment and clarity and focus for our leadership team on one of our most important initiatives and on the cost containment. You see it in the respect for our employees and our want to bring along our people in a different way. And as I say, I mean, if anybody came back and has embodied what we learned, Kecia's like the A+ gold star student.
Kecia, what are some of those, if you think back to maybe 6 months ago to today, what are some examples, and Amy, you too, what are some examples of those behavior shifts that you have made, knowing this is an ongoing learning journey over many years that you've had, but really at the beginning of the year to now, what are some shifts that you've made in how you show up with your teams or at work to demonstrate that you are, this serious, convicted leader?
I've gone through some another kind of development program around being a leader, and it's all about being and not necessarily doing. It's about, I feel more courageous and convicted in the work that we're engaged in, and I say that because my lens through which how we're focusing on work. First of all, it's not even about me, right? I mean, I get a benefit from it, but it's not about like how can I make myself better and how can I be a great person. It's this magnitude of servitude or servant leadership towards the people that you're serving. And I never claimed to be a servant leader, but I do claim to be on the journey to be a servant leader. I see my role as one that is in service of others. So when I approach the work, I carry that lens of being a serious leader in that I'm trying to serve my teams. I may feel like a failure if I'm doing something that's not in service to them. So it's really been an incredible shift I've never really been centered around myself, but really in my service to my teams. It's just taken on a whole different form. And what's interesting is that you won't see me touting around, oh, this is what I learned in Japan. It's not, it's just because really honestly, everybody doesn't want to hear about what you learned in Japan, but it's a reflection of the things that you learned in Japan. So it's really in just how I'm showing up and bringing the entire senior vice president team together along that work. I think having Jonathan and myself there, we are both clearly very strong and accomplished leaders, but we have different styles of leadership, but we're very powerful. And Melinda as well, too. I know she didn't attend, but so we bring a different flavor. So it's interesting that we both bring, it's a way that we're showing up on the team and people can feel it. They can see it. They acknowledge it. And it's just kind of fun to see because you can't really put your finger on it. It's just that there's something really serious about moving this work forward. And it's made me much more courageous in taking on things that actually probably would have scared me in the past.
What's an example of that? Of how you're either being more courageous or something you're doing a little bit different?
Well, I can tell you that one of the things that Catherine entrusted me with, and this was prior to the Japan trip, but I'm a nurse. I'm the nurse. I represent all things nursing. But I also have an accountability for all things pharmacy. And I have an accountability for all things lab. I'm not a pharmacist and I am not a lab person. And those are two perfect examples of it doesn't require you to be a pharmacist or a laboratorian to lead, right? But it's about, it's that continuous developing myself to understand that world. So I can talk about lab in that because that's one that's really just so far out of my comfort zone. It's just completely out there. But I have continued just to find ways to learn all things lab. It is a state of continuous learning, but there's also a state of humility. I mean, I can tell you there are some times that I don't even understand. It's like you're speaking an entirely different language. I don't get it. But I have the courage to say, you know what? I really don't understand that. And I need a little bit more time for you to help me to understand that. Because if I don't understand it, I can't support the work. I can't lead the work if I don't understand it. So there's this vacillation between being humble and just continuously learning. And that's one where I've said, and I mean, I was with our LabCorp executives, I think a week before last, and I was so lost that like I had a headache and I went home and I went to bed. I just did. But I talked to the senior vice president the next day and I said, listen, I said, there's some things that we discussed yesterday that I absolutely have no clue what you said. And so he took some time with me and helped me to understand what he was trying to explain. And then I got it. And so now I feel that much more empowered and knowledgeable that I can support that work moving forward. And so that's a change for me. And it is that thing around that self-development that created the capacity for me to do that, Katie.
Powerful. Amy, how about one example for you on that?
I gave you an example in a microcosm of like A3s, right? So prior to the trip, you might be working on a A3 with somebody you're leading and just take it off and do it. And after talking to Mr. Yoshino about developing your people and taking the time to let them learn instead of using that reflex from the experience you had and the knowledge that you have, but letting them do the self-discovery so that, again, it's that sustainable change that Kecia referred to earlier, is taking the time to do that, which is really hard in healthcare because like it's a fast and furious industry that is changing all the time, and we're trying to keep up, and there's issues to solve, and you want to keep moving, but that investment in your people to develop them and create the skills there, it will be longer lasting and sustainable. So.
And it's not just in healthcare that I see this, it's across, all industries, this pressure to get results. And so, A3 is a problem solving format that was introduced in Toyota, and I talk about it in my book. But, I see this not just in healthcare, but like other organizations too, where it feels easier for leaders just to give the answer or take over the problem solving process because, you already know how to get there and you can get there faster. So it's this trade-off between time and speed and getting to the answer that you think might be the right answer versus developing the capability. And as leaders, you really have to make that trade-off. But again, you're then burdening yourself with all that problem solving that Kecia was talking about and not able to do all the other things. So that I see as such the tension of leadership of like, how do you set the direction and then not take over all the problem solving, even in this sense of, all the stress and chaos and the need to get results. The results get there because of the process and the people. One final question for you both about if you were talking to other senior leaders, regardless if they're in healthcare or other industries, what is one piece of advice that you have for how to take a step forward in being a more serious leader about creating this sort of high-performing, people-centered learning organization that gets results?
I mean, for me, it would be around that 1,000% conviction and taking the time to explore that you're all on the same page as to what that really means, and asking the curious questions to take a deeper dive and not take wherever you're going with your 1,000% conviction as sort of that surface level piece, but really understanding the depths of it, because you could see that. And it really struck me that not only is it about respect for people and developing people, it's about how those people can then take care of their families, and subsequently how that then rolls up to taking care of a community. That's not just respecting people, it's much more.
I love that, Amy. You said a couple of things I was going to say. But I would say, Katie, is that, what I would tell leaders, it's not about you. It is not about you. These roles are, as Amy said, which I wanted to add is that, when you're serving a team and leading a team of people, you are leading them and their families and remembering that. So I think that's one thing that I think is important. But I would just go back to just this commitment to finding ways to build capability. Make sure that, make sure you're not the one being the problem solver. There's nothing more exhausting than people just opening up trash on your desk and asking you to sift through it and solve it. And so it's exhausting as a leader. And so I would say that, your success is defined in your ability to develop your teams and your leaders and to be able to develop the next leader below that level and to develop that. That is how your success is defined. And that's how you will have the most gratitude and satisfaction as a leader. And I really do think that it is a perfect recipe to prevent burnout at this level as a senior executive by building that capability within your teams. And honestly, Katie, I'm going to tell you that I have really enjoyed that freedom since coming back from Japan. It is an incredible freedom that I have, and it brings me joy to just see that how the leaders on my team have evolved and are becoming more of being able some of that capability. I'm starting to see that, and that brings me gratitude. So that's what I would share with other leaders.
That's fantastic. And I guess I have one more bonus question for you. We talked earlier about how you can learn in many ways and that development is, of course, first and foremost about how are you applying and practicing in the work you're doing, but also having experiences can help you accelerate on that learning journey. And one of which, was a big investment that you and your leadership team made to come to Japan as a group, as a leadership cohort. What would you say to any other leader who's on this journey and sort of trying on the fence about whether or not they can or should make the investment in going on a Japan study trip with me?
Yeah, I'm going to, if someone was on the fence, I think that a lot of times in the world of lean, I think people think they're like experts in that space of leading in a lean environment. And I think that having a point of self-reflection, and I can just tell you that I actually did the Audible, the book of your learning to lead, leading to learn. And I actually had and it was really good for me because it was just playing in my ear and I could hear your voice and Mr. Yoshino's voice. But I can tell you that allowed me to do a personal reflection and assessment of where I was. And it really opened up for me that I have a lot to learn. And I think that sometimes people may think that a trip to Japan is like, oh, I don't need to go there. I already know what I need to do. That's just a trip to Japan. I think that, and I'm not saying that maybe it's other books that are like yours or other readings or moments, but I think there needs to be a point of really kind of self-reflection. And I felt like the book really forced me to really reflect. And what it did is it created the capacity for me to want to learn. And I probably would have wanted to try and find my own money to go had Legacy not made that investment in me because I really felt that much value in it. And the sushi that I didn't eat was good. No. But yeah, it looked good.
It's so hard to say what we learned and saw, but the ideal condition that I might have seen prior to our visit is very different than the ideal condition that I would see after the visit. And it's so much better. And there's so much more happiness and joy. It's inexplicable in some ways. I mean, I really have struggled to explain to people sort of that joy and happiness that we saw in the workplace and how the people, I mean, you look at Ina Foods and how they come to work early and they have created this beautiful park that hundreds of thousands of people come to each year and they help manicure it and keep it clean and beautiful. And they do that because it's a gift to the community. And how the kids in the school, they clean the school and the teachers didn't intervene. You can tell the stories, but actually seeing it is so much more. And my ideal condition is so much more clear and happy and joyful than it would have been before the trip.
That's beautiful. And it all goes back to how do we create like joy? And that's the holding precious what it means to be human. Ina Foods that you mentioned is like their happiness is their purpose. And of course they need business results and all of that too, but they lead with happiness. So what if we moved healthcare to leading with joy, right? And health and how would that shift how, everything. So thank you both for being such serious and joyful leaders. It was a pleasure to host you in Japan and to get to know you. And this is not the end of our, learning journey and our relationship together. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Lean Solutions Summit next month in September of 2024 in Michigan, and continuing to support each other as we continue to build this chain of learning together.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much. Being serious as a leader is the key to getting the results that you need for your customers, be they patients at a hospital or consumers of your service or product. As Kecia and Amy highlighted, leadership is about solving problems, but it's about first focusing on people, your people, and helping them take ownership of solving problems. It's about creating the conditions for your people to be successful, first by setting a clear direction, and then providing support and showing that you care. It's about committing to your own personal development and being 1000% convicted of the real results your organization needs and how you will help your people. It's about having clarity on that ideal condition for your organization that transcends a focus purely on getting business results, but instead on how to instill a culture of joy, happiness, and humanity to the workplace so that results and problem solving are the output of engagement and a sense of shared purpose and mission. Whether you're an executive or a change leader coaching senior leaders, to create an organization that gets results through a focus on people and learning. Go to Gemba, the place that work happens, not just to check on processes, but to show that you care about people. Ask more questions and give space for learning. Unburden yourself from the responsibility of having to solve every problem, what I call break the telling habit, which you can learn more about in episode 13. And focus more on being and less on doing. How are you showing up as a leader rather than getting overwhelmed by the busyness and firefighting that can get in your way, which I explored in detail in episode 4 of this podcast. As you reflect, identify one way that you're going to focus on developing yourself over the next month as a leader leading change, whether you're a senior leader, team leader, or continuous improvement practitioner. Write down the action you want to demonstrate. Set your intention for practice for each day and reflect at the end of how you showed up and what you're learning. Remember, it's the process of being committed, seriously committed to developing yourself and to learning that is the foundation for organizational change. It's about how you are growing your chain of learning with intention and conviction. If you're ready to take your leadership to the next level, either as an individual change leader, executive, or a leadership cohort in the same organization, join me for one of my upcoming immersive Japan study trip leadership development programs. As Kecia and Amy highlighted, the opportunity to step away from your day-to-day work, to invest in your leadership development individually and as a team, and to see how leaders are applying these leadership principles in action is an investment that will have an exponential impact on you, your teams, and your organization. To learn more and submit your application, go to kbjanderson.com/Japan trip. I'll put the links to this and other resources mentioned in this episode in the show notes, as well as information of how to connect with my guests, Dr. Kecia Kelly and Dr. Amy Chaumeton. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and subscribe now to Chain of Learning and leave a review on your favorite podcast player. Thanks for being a link in my chain of learning today. I'll see you next time. Have a great day.